Starting with problem definition here. So one of the things I've experienced as I've been working since the 90s with people creating websites and increasingly working with organizations that own multiple websites is that increasingly in this era of roll-ups, of M&As, of a multi-channel strategy for publishers, many large businesses and even some small businesses don't just have a single website. They have a collection of websites. They have a portfolio of websites or properties that they own, and they often want to get some of the benefit of sharing and reusing content between them. So in the very sophisticated illustration I have here, you have a site, you have some story you've created as the canonical source for that site, and then you want to create copies or versions of that story for other properties or other sites you might own. A lot of examples of use cases. So this is the Portland Herald Press, as they also own a digital-only site in Maine. They share both a theme and a set of aesthetics, but they also share a lot of stories between the two sites depending on the audience. So what you're seeing in that little arrow illustration is in addition to sharing the content, where they're trying to do things like reference back for some of the SEO benefit, for some of the attribution benefit in the author. They're trying to reference back to the original source. Other examples work with a lot of large organizations that have centralized newsrooms. They probably have one news.pickyourorganization.com, but they may also have a number of different sites that are more targeted, right? So you might be a university that has individual news centers within each of your departments that you want to share some stories back to the main site, or maybe you want to share them across departments because two departments are working together on an initiative or a project. This is a picture for Uber where they actually have a multi-site setup which they've created to sandbox individual authors, where they create a lot of stories very targeted at individual cities, but there's also a lot of sharing between sites in the same region, and even in some cases sharing across the entire network. Other examples we run across on everybody's mind, GDPR. So you might own 5 different websites. You might have a standard policy. You don't want to go back and forth to all 5 sites every time you update your standard policy across all sites. You want to share just a couple of key pages, might be like corporate about pages, might be who, this is owned by who pages that you want to share and have one copy you maintain across all of your sites. Other examples, creating a content staging site that might be private, creating all of your content there and then sending that out to another site. A lot increasingly in e-commerce, you're selling across multiple channels, you're selling across multiple sites, multiple identities. You may maintain products in multiple stores or multiple sites. There are businesses that do content syndication as their entire business model, and the whole way of doing it is being able to suck down their content in classically organizations like Associated Press here in the States. And oftentimes they need a better, more intuitive solution to help sell their product to make it really easy content workflow-wise for their customers. Blogger networks cultivating sharing, so sort of like a retweet feature for blogs. Another case we've run across a couple of times with smaller organizations is they may have individuals within their company. It might be sort of like the president's blog, it might be sort of their CTO's or their engineering blog. Might be individual employees, might be partners, where they want to occasionally reshare some content to the main site. So lots of different examples. We felt like this was the classic case of we're solving this problem in some variation over and over again. We can do better here. We can use some of the lessons learned. Some of our lessons learned from solving the problem over and over, and decided to embrace the spirit of open source and create a plugin that we've released called Distributor, which I'm going to tell you about. So tagline, or sort of the short version of what Distributor is, it's a WordPress plugin designed to make it really easy in terms of user experience to syndicate and reuse content across your websites, whether that's a single multi-site where you're hosting all your sites and sharing content, whether those are completely separated sites across the web. So the way 10up thinks about a better web, a lot of this for us starts with user experience design. So we've really spent a lot of time carefully crafting an interface that makes it quick and intuitive. What this means in practice is we take advantage of that WordPress menu bar up at the top that you see here, which means even if you're browsing the site on the front end, if you're logged in, say, in a multi-site, you stumble upon one of your partner site stories and you like that story, you just go right up to the distributor menu bar and you see all the sites you have permission to publish to. You choose that site and you click distribute. By default, you can choose to send it as a draft, so then you can go click on it and make any changes you want to make to that story. If you're editing it in the back end, you just prepared your story, you just published it, and you know you want to send this to certain other channels, you can do it right from there. So we really put a lot of energy into making it very easy. If there's a lot of sites in the network, you can search the list of sites to quickly pull up the site, sort of orders it by sites where it's already sent. So a lot of effort put into the user experience being intuitive. That's sort of the zoomed in version of when you click on that distributor menu and you only have a few sites. So that's the push interface. We also know that there's a use case, for example, those content syndicators where you may know you want to be constantly checking a series of other sites for content that you can pull in rather than push across. So distributor also offers an interface to look across your sites, scan all the content, choose the ones you want to pull over. You can also say, I know I never want this one, push it into the skip menu and get it out of your visibility for later. One of the challenges to solve in distributor that we spent a lot of energy on is what it means to bring everything across. So it's not just the content of the story, it's all of the media. We push images, media across between sites. We can share tags, taxonomy data across sites. We can share all the metadata, be savvy to things like referencing the correct ID for an image that's a featured image when it moves across sites. So a lot of energy has gone into what it means to share everything across those sites. It's also very information architecture aware, which is to say you go into that pull interface. We're not going to tease you by showing you, say, purchasing ticket content if your site doesn't support that. So it very intelligently limits which sites you can push content to or what content you can pull based on matching information architecture, post types, taxonomies that exist on both ends. One of my favorite things about distributor is that it handles things like getting updates from the canonical source. So if you leave it in that canonical state, if you make any changes to the original canonical story, every copy of that story immediately gets those changes across all of the sites. You can also click that unlink button and choose, basically say you want to fork it. It keeps some metadata, so if you still want to attribute the original author, if you still want to get some original data, you can. And then if you were to click that, it also gives you a little thing up at the top that says, did you make a mistake? Do you need to go back because there's a bunch of changes to the story? You can restore that link and restore the canonical copy. As I mentioned earlier, you can share content between sites in a multi-site network where there's already the awareness of what are the permissions across the site. We also fully support the WordPress REST API, so you can push content completely across different sites on the web. And we've built support for a number of authentication methods. In addition to the standard WordPress REST API, because we're often working with partners like VIP Classic, you can also use the WordPress.com REST API that's built right in. It's also Gutenberg Ready. I'm not going to try to zoom in, but you can see the version of the, do you want to fork this up at the top in yellow? You can see over in the sidebar, there's a little distributed information pane below the author. We've already taken care of making it a Gutenberg savvy. Also, search engine optimized. People in this room are probably more savvy, but a lot of customers using it don't realize that if you're not careful with repeating content, repeating headlines, you can accidentally give yourself an SEO penalty. It just takes care of canonical meta tags. We take care of the way that Yoast, as a popular solution, overrides some of those options to make sure that we're compatible. Very carefully handle things like original author attributions and references by default to make sure you're not going to get a penalty for using it. Like all good WordPress plugins and solutions, it's made to be extended. We have hooks and filters throughout the plugin for any custom workflow that you might want to build. So for example, we have customers that have different rules for distributed content for automatic social sharing than they do for content original to the site. It even has a whole extensible interface to build other connection types. So if you wanted to build a connector for Drupal or a generic RSS feed, you can build other connection types to different kind of sources. Already WordPress.com VIP approved. It's running on Classic. It's running on Go. We've already gone through that process and have it running live on customers. We have built-in support, as I mentioned, for WordPress.com's REST API, as well as OAuth 2 authentication on WordPress.com needed to share. Some things on the roadmap, support for additional REST API authentication methods. So there's a lot of ways you can secure and lock down your REST API, gradually rolling out support for all the popular different ways that you might want to secure it. One of the more exciting things I think on our roadmaps, I think it's one of our time working together, is support for takedowns. So there's a lot of sophistication in the plugin around, okay, I publish a post, what if it gets unpublished and it's an original source? What if I delete the post that's been distributed? Version 1 handles that in some simple ways, but we have on our roadmap the notion that when you choose to unpublish a post that's been distributed or choose to delete it, that it gives you some immediate options to say, is this a let it be if it's on other sites? Is this a takedown where you want to immediately make sure it's removed even if it's been forked across all sites? Using some of the version comparison features in WordPress to compare the original and the canonical. So if you've chosen to fork it and you want to see side by side, how is the original changed from my forked version, you can look at it. More sophisticated taxonomy options. One of the things we found in using this in practice is there's very different expectations across different people, especially publishers, sharing content around whether or not they want to bring over tags, categories, whether or not they want to preserve, not mess with the category or taxonomy architecture on a remote site, and just tighter integration with additional plugins. So a lot of edge cases to solve around things like advanced custom fields is a popular plugin in some quarters. It does a lot of like referencing post IDs and things that become a little tricky when you're sharing across sites. That's the place where you can go and get it. We're still calling it closed beta for right now. We pretty much give it to anybody else, anybody who just fills out the form and says, I want it. Just want to be very careful about releasing something and having a relationship with the people that we release it to, because we think it is such, has such an impact on how you're going to publish. That's my talk.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jake.